commander-in-chief, they hold executive powers, they hold powers related to our legislation, powers of appointment, powers of executive clemency, foreign affairs, emergency powers, executive privilege. We see how the presidency affects us every single day, but probably the biggest one that we talk about in this moment under the current president is judicial appointments. And that's not just the Supreme Court. Obviously, we're having this really, really big fight over the seat that is now open because of the passing of Justice Ginsburg, right? And we are obviously seeing Republicans try to push through their nominee, and wherever you land on whatever side of the aisle that you are, but also just federal judicial appointments across the country. And these are things that affect our everyday lives. I think specifically of reproductive justice for women, right? When you look at Roe v. Wade and whether that will continue to be the law of the land. I mean, there are a ton of different core issues that we deal with. We continue to have fights over LGBTQIA+ issues. That is, again, something that is a function of the judges that are sitting on the bench. It's also extremely consequential because at least at the Supreme Court level, these are lifetime appointments. So super, super important. If you go down one step in the ballot here, we move to our borough president. So the borough president sounds like an executive function, right? But it's actually not an executive position. It's a little bit more like an advisory position. They advocate on behalf of their boroughs to the mayor's office. They still act as like they have a bully pulpit, right? They have a microphone. They're able to advocate on behalf of their constituents. They also have a very sizable say in public land use in their boroughs. So what they do is each borough president gets to put somebody on the city planning commission, right? They also appoint members to the community boards who then make decisions on things like whether your neighborhood gets more bike lanes, whether there's street restoration. They have an effect on the liquor license process. They also, each borough president gets 5% of the city budget. And so they fund lots of things throughout their boroughs. And they can fund things that, everything from like schools and city universities to violence interruption programs to all types of social services. They can hold town halls. They can sponsor bills. They can hold emergency press conferences. So those are some of the things that your borough president does. So they have a lot of money to sort of use discretionary. 5% of the city budget is quite a large amount. I think I may be wrong on this, but I think it's like 800 million. Does that sound right? I don't know if anybody knows off the top of their head, but I think it's something like that. I'll look that up while Katie is going. I'm going to make sure I give you the right answer on that. So we're going to keep moving. And also, so our options here in Queens are Donovan Richards on the Democrat side and Joanne Ariola on the Republican side. We are going to move to Congress now. Now on my ballot, you can see that my current rep is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I feel very, very lucky. But also, if you are on a different part of Astoria, your rep might be Carolyn Maloney. So you might see her on your ballot on the Democrat line. I, to be honest, don't know who's running as a Republican against Carolyn Maloney, but John C. Cummins is the Republican that's running for that seat. Obviously, that is that's the U.S. House of Representatives. It is a federal elected office. I don't want to be all doom and gloom about your congressperson, because the fact of the matter is that we do struggle a lot, because a lot of things that we pass in the House of Representatives kind of gets like blown up when it reaches the Senate, which is a little bit frustrating. I mean, we've obviously seen that throughout the pandemic when we have asked for more relief in terms of stimulus funds, but our congressional members, they act on behalf of constituents in their districts when it comes to bills, resolutions, other national issues. They make laws. Congress has the power to declare war. They raise and provide public money and oversee its proper expenditure. They impeach and try federal officers. They approve presidential appointments. They approve treaties negotiated by the executive branch, and they do oversight and investigations. So like all of those viral videos you see of like, you know, AOC or Ayanna Pressley, or I think one of the people who does it the best is Katie Porter. She's like brilliant with a whiteboard. You know, all those hearings, those are oversight hearings. And it's a way also to get information out to the public so that they kind of have their thumb on the pulse of like what's happening. Like I said, things get stalled in the Senate, but an effective congressional rep can still secure a lot of public resources for their district through budget and stimulus packages, even under a Republican Senate. So still very, very, very important. And so when we move down, we have the Senate and the Assembly, which I'm just going to talk about together. If you are in another part of Astoria, you might see Jessica Ramos on your ballot. You can see Mike G., who is my senator, doesn't have a Republican challenger. And then here we have Zoran Mamdani as well for the Assembly. So the legislature is this is our state legislature, right? It is the lawmaking branch of our state government. It's a bicameral or two-house body composed of the Senate and the Assembly. So the Senate is the upper house, the Assembly is the lower house. And the lawmaking powers of the legislature include the appropriation of funds for the operation of our state government and its agencies, and for aid to the local governments. They are in charge of our penal law, our penal code, right? So the definition or acts that constitute crimes in our state and what the sentencing exposure is on those offenses. They are there for the promotion of public welfare. And that is supposed to, in theory, include that of our state's, you know, like ultra low income and poor communities, our state's constituents that are struggling with mental health issues or that are unemployed. And the other thing too is that the body is meant to be a check on the governor. Although I think it's worth pointing out that during the last budget process, in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of this crisis, our state legislature gave the government expanded powers. And so because of that, they are a little less able to be an effective check on our governor. Essentially, the governor's team told legislators that if they didn't vote for the budget, they would shut down the Department of Health. And like, you know, that's sort of the kind of political football that happens, I think, at every level of government between, you know, branches that are naturally in tension. Let's see what else. Oh, also only the Senate, by the way, has the power to confirm the governor's appointment of non-elected state officials and court judges. So they obviously in both bodies, they write and introduce bills that affect New Yorkers across the entire state. They inform their constituents of public meetings. They do constituent services. They deliver resources to their constituents through the budget process. And they hold city and state agencies accountable to responding to constituent needs. This matters a lot to us, and we feel the impact of this office in a very, very real personal way on a daily, a daily level. Some of the things that you may know about or may experience and think of is like at the state level, we just won like the Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act. And that's literally kept hundreds of thousands of people in their homes. And that is by virtue of the people that you elected to represent us in the state legislature. Because of that, rent control is permanent. Because of that, preferential rents are permanent too. Application fees and broker fees have been brought under control. Market rate apartments have to follow new rules. It dismantled the tenant blacklist. It made procedural and court changes to the eviction process, which actually better protects not just tenants, but also landlords in eviction processes. When we talk about folks that maybe, and there's a lot of this in Astoria, for example, that own like a family home that has a couple of apartments in it. I'm not talking about like big corporate landlords and stuff like that. We restored the right for undocumented folks to get driver's licenses. We made sure that Dreamers had access to financial aid for higher education. Those are all things that our state reps did. We passed laws for sexual harassment in the workplace protections, and also recently passed the Comprehensive Contraceptive Care Act, which is a bill that ensures that every insurer in New York State must cover the full cost of contraception for patients. It's the reason why prescribed birth control is completely free in New York, or the cost is capped very low if you're completely uninsured. And fun fact, it covers all 18 forms of FDA-approved contraception. And another fun fact is that I have no idea what all 18 forms of FDA-approved contraception are, but they're all covered. So those are like, I mean, these are things that I think that affect us in a real way every day that your state reps are in charge of. All right, so we are going to move to justices of the Supreme Court. So we have the 11th District Supreme Court judges that covers our borough of Queens, and it's one of 13 judicial districts in the state of New York. The district serves all of Queens County, and it's one of the 5 judicial districts that make up New York City. And there are 2 branches in the Queens County Supreme Court. It's the criminal term and the civil term. This and the section after this is also judges, is the judge of the civil court. The thing that I want to say about these is that, like, typically up to this point, it's really hard to get information and go into into the voting booth feeling like you have enough information about these judges and knowing who you want to vote for specific reasons. And I say that as somebody that was a practicing attorney, just a year and a half ago. Really Sorry, I think I got knocked off for a second. Should I share my screen again and keep going? Okay. So I'm going to share my screen. I appreciate your patience, y'all. So what I was saying was that there's not a lot of information that's easily accessible out there, although Katie, I think you have some suggestions in your portion on getting some more information, but it's really hard. But currently there are organizers here in Queens specifically, actually. The New Reformers have been doing a lot of this work in trying to elect judicial delegates that are making a commitment to transparency, right? Because up to this point, a lot of our judicial nominees have sort of been picked behind closed doors without really the input of the community and without any accountability to community members, right? Like, we want to know where our judges stand, how they view cash bail, for example, how they view things like civil asset forfeiture, for example. So those are things that are starting to shift. I don't have much good advice, rather than hopefully Katie has some better advice than me. I do, and I admit, as somebody that is very civically engaged, as somebody who works in politics, I have a hard time making an educated vote when it comes to judges, and that's obviously a problem, because what about other folks that, like, this isn't their world, or this isn't what they like, eat, sleep, and breathe. And so that's like sort of what you'll see on your ballot. There is one more thing that I want to talk about on the ballot, and it is about the other party lines. So we went through mostly the Democratic and Republican lines. We also have the conservative line, the working families line, the Green and Libertarian lines. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the working families ballot line. In New York State, we have what's called fusion voting. So in other places, third parties are considered spoilers, right? They make it so that somebody doesn't win their election because the vote is split. Well, when you have fusion voting, that's not the case. So for example, if I'm going to vote for Joe Biden for president, whether I vote on the Democratic line or the Working Families Party line, which he's on both, they will be counted both as a vote for Joe Biden, period. They go together. And the reason why folks look to a line where there's fusion voting like the Working Families Party is because we look, or elected officials, parties, all of these folks, they look at this line and it's really a way of forwarding sort of like what your values are. If you consider yourself a progressive Democrat, for example, you might consider voting on the Working Families line because it tells folks that not only are you a Democrat, but you are a Democrat that, for example, supports a Green New Deal. You are a Democrat, for example, that supports a livable wage, a minimum livable wage. You are a Democrat that supports a lot of different progressive ideals. And that's important because when people look at your ballots and do the tallies and say who voted where, it's a signal to the people who are in office, who are in power, of like who they are accountable to, right? And recently during that budget process, something that happened was Governor Cuomo made it so that it is harder in New York to have third party lines. He upped the threshold. So for example, for the Working Families Party to stay on the ballot, they have to get 2% of the overall vote on their ballot line, or they lose the ballot line. And they have to do it every 2 years. So for the gubernatorial and for the presidential, this is sort of like unprecedented. Nowhere in the country are there thresholds that high for a third party. So something to be really mindful of. I think, when you're looking at your ballot and you're trying to figure out where you're going to go, how you're going to vote, I would certainly encourage folks to look into both, the Working Families Party and the Democratic Party, and obviously if you're conservative or Republican, but when it's a way really to like sort of distinguish your votes. I mean, look at the IDC. Are folks familiar with the IDC, by the way? Or you can get like a show of hands, or so like, for example, the IDC was the independent, independent Democrats in the state legislature that the Working Families and a bunch of coalition groups came together because they were essentially voting with Republicans at the state level. And so they challenged them primarily on the Working Families line. We see it talked about on the federal level a lot. An easy way to think about it is the difference between, when the squad is talking about progressive Dems versus corporate Dems, right? Like that's the example. So that's your ballot in a nutshell. You just saw my ballot. My ballot looks a lot like yours. You might have some small differences here and there depending on where exactly in Astoria you are, but I'm looking forward to hearing from Katie and from taking your questions a little later on. I should stop sharing my screen. There we go. Okay.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. That was hugely informational. Katie, I did unmute you. Excellent. Yeah, take it away.
Awesome. Let me just share my screen. First off, Tiffany, that was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. I learned so much about judges that I had never known before. I do want to make one note while I'm getting this set up and ready to go. With fusion voting, make sure you don't, like, although it's the same candidate on 2 party lines, make sure you just fill it in under 1 line. Actually, during the 2016 election, I was volunteering. I was working at the Associated Press Election Center, and there was a lot of people that had accidentally filled in twice, on both lines, and they were like, "We should just count it," and eventually it did, but it was causing some problems in Connecticut, but eventually got resolved. So thank you for pointing that out, and I think that's a great educational thing to do. So can all of you see my screen? Can someone give me a thumbs up? Awesome. So my name's Katie. I'm a volunteer with the Astoria Mutual Aid Network, and I'm also the team elections lead. And before I dive into voting plans, I just want to give a brief recap about what Astoria Mutual Aid is. So like Renee pointed out, we started only in response to COVID. I think this shows the greatness of the neighborhood and the people that live here, of how we all came together through this. We wanted to help neighbors. So first we started doing errands for neighbors that were higher risk for COVID. So grocery runs, rides to medical appointments, etc. And we have grown into this nonpartisan grassroots organization. So these are some of the basic things that we help neighbors with. So transportation to medical appointments. We have neighbors that check on other neighbors who are dealing with loneliness issues, connecting with benefit and health information. But we've grown. We have all these specialized team now. We have our coat drive, free store, free food fridges, open spaces, the rolling library, voter education and census outreach, which is one of the teams that I head up. So if you're interested, as we say, we're neighbors who give help and get help. We would love to have you part of the network. If you go to AstoriaMutualAid.com, you can click on get help or give help, and then sign up for it, what you are interested in. Also, if there's something that you feel passionately about that you think would be a benefit to the neighborhood, let us know. We're happy to have you kind of go and run with it. Like they let me go and run with, like, I'm really excited about voting rights and just want to get as many people to participate, which has been a blessing because we have done 57 voter registration, now voter education drives since July, and have registered over 300 of our neighbors to vote. But my favorite part is talking about voting plans, which is what I'm going to do with you today. So the good news is we have options here in New York. You have the options of absentee ballot voting, early voting, and election day voting. And I'm going to take you through all three. First, we're going to start with absentee ballot voting. That just means you're voting by mail because you're unable to vote in person on election day. Usually before COVID, it's because people were traveling, were out of state, that sort of thing. But in New York State, you actually have to apply for an absentee ballot and give a reason. So in August, Governor Cuomo signed legislation that says, listen, if you're afraid to go to the polls because you're worried about contracting COVID, you can absolutely request an absentee ballot. But you need to check off temporary illness or physical disability as the reason why you're requesting an absentee ballot. I heard today from Board of Elections that over 740,000 New York City residents have already applied for absentee ballots. So although the deadline is October 27th, just apply now. You can apply online, which is fantastic. You can go to nycabsentee.com. Or if you run into the Astoria Mutual Aid Network, let's say outside the Brass Owl, we would be happy to give you a printed absentee ballot application along with a mailing envelope so you can send back to Board of Election. We even put a stamp on there, just trying to make the process as easy as possible. So for those of you who haven't voted by absentee before, when you send in your application, they're going to send you back these three items: a ballot envelope, which is also known as an oath envelope, and a mailing return envelope. So when you receive these materials, just double check your name and address are correct on all the materials. There was an issue in Brooklyn where 100,000 voters accidentally received envelopes with the wrong name and address on it. The vendor, Phoenix Graphics, were like, we fucked up, we're fixing this, and it's being resolved now. So don't worry, but just take that beat to check over your materials. Also, if you see Tiffany has access to her sample ballot, you can also view your sample ballot. Just double check that your election district and assembly district match on your absentee ballot and your sample ballot to make sure everything's good to go. And you could find your sample ballot by going to findmypollsite.vote.nyc. Now, if there are any issues, you can email Board of Elections, you can call them, you can DM them on Twitter. I messaged them last night about a question and they got back to me this morning, so that's good. Or you can contact your local elected officials. They're there to serve you, so if you are concerned about any of those things, you can definitely reach out to them. Now, another thing you should note is, for example, the ballots went out saying official absentee military ballots. What it probably should have said was official absentee / military ballot. A lot of people got freaked out, but don't freak out because these ballots are valid and will be accepted even if you're not in the military. So just make sure you complete those, and then you can mail in your absentee ballot. So don't worry, if you're not in the military, please fill out that ballot. Okay, so now I'm going to take you through the process. You've got your ballot envelope, and your mailing envelope. First thing you're going to do is you're going to fill out your absentee ballot. So complete your ballot, and then you're going to take your ballot and put it in the ballot envelope. Make sure you seal it and then sign and date the back. I cannot stress this enough. 24% of absentee ballots that were sent in the June primary were disqualified. And one of the biggest reasons were because people didn't know they were supposed to sign and date the back or seal the envelope. You want to think of this action as the same thing as if you were voting in person at the polls and you're putting your ballot in the scanner and it's getting locked away. You putting it in the envelope, sealing it, sign and dating the back of it is like you doing that action. And then once you have that completed, sealed, ballot envelope, you're going to put it in the mailing return envelope. You have a couple options in terms of sending it back. So this is fairly new. If you're worried about the mail, because that's apparently a thing we have to worry about now, you can drop off your absentee ballot at any poll site. So it doesn't have to be your poll site. You could be an early voting site, your election day poll site, or a board of elections. If you have a friend or family member that is homebound, that is unable to drop it off, you as a trusted source can drop off the absentee ballot for them. And at all of these places, this is exactly what the box will look like, because now we also have to worry about people making up their own absentee ballot boxes, but this is what it's going to look like. It'll be at the front table as you walk in at those sites, and you can just drop it in for someone. Now, you can also mail it. But postage is required. This is different from the June primary. So if you voted by absentee in the June primary, postage was paid. For some reason, they decided not to make the postage page this time around. Also, the Queen's ballots specifically are more than an ounce. So you got to put 2 forever stamps on there, or go to the post office and pay 70 cents for a stamp. This is different. We're trying to give out this information. If you see Astoria Mutual Aid at any of our voter education drives, we're actually giving everybody 2 stamps that are planning to vote absentee, because we want to make sure everything's good. Some people who've already sent in their absentee were actually sent back their ballots for insufficient postage, but I believe they're trying to make an exception, saying, you know what, even if someone put 1 postage stamp on here, we're going to send it through. So just keep an eye on that. Your absentee ballot must be postmarked by Election Day and must be received by Board of Elections by Tuesday, November 10th. But don't wait. Apply now if this is what you're interested in doing. This year, you can actually track your absentee ballot. This is new. You can go to nycabsentee.com/tracking. Just type in your voter information. You can find out if your absentee ballot was received and it was accepted. You can also track the status of your application if you've applied online. Okay, a couple of things about absentee ballot voting. So you can vote in person even if you requested an absentee ballot and received it. And you could vote in person even if you mailed back your absentee ballot. What happens is New York State recognizes that you can change your mind. So if you send in your absentee ballot, decide to go vote in person, your absentee ballot will be canceled out. So I know a lot of people are requesting absentee ballots just in case, but are planning to vote in person, and that's an option for you. So that's absentee ballot voting. I'm now going to move on to my favorite voting option, early voting. So this is relatively new. You may not have heard about it. Early voting was enacted in January 2019. It allows voters in all elections to vote up to 10 days prior to Election Day. It's going to start on Saturday, October 24th, and it ends on Sunday, November 1st. Now, I love it, but there's a couple of things you should know. Number one, your early voting site will most likely not be the same as your Election Day poll site. So usually your Election Day poll site is a school, and schools don't want to give up their cafeteria, gymnasium, auditorium combination for 10 days. So early voting sites have a tendency to be community centers or cultural institutions. And it may be further away. So for example, On election day, I normally vote at Henry David Thoreau next to Athens Square Park, but my early voting site is the Boys and Girls Club on 21st Street, so it's a little bit further a walk. So factor that in if you're going to go early vote. Also, the hours vary from day to day. And when I say vary, I mean like the first 2 days are 10 to 4, and the next day is 7 to 3, and then after that it's 12 to 8. So you want to double check the hours and make a plan before you go early vote. But it's convenient, you know, with early voting, you can go at a time that's more convenient for you, maybe avoid the crowds. And, you know, the first time I did early voting, it was great. My poll site was Momi, and like my friend and I, Margaret, went, voted, saw Jojo Rabbit, and then went for margaritas afterwards. And then I spent the next 8 days going, I voted, right? Yes, I went with Margaret. I didn't have to wake up ass early to get there before work and then rush to my desk. I early voted. So I'm planning to early vote as well. And you could find your early voting poll site and double check the hours, again, by going to findmypollsite.vote.nyc. You just type in your address and it gives you your information. You can also view a sample ballot as well. So bonus. Now there are 3 early voting sites in Western Queens: the Boys and Girls Club on 21st Street, the Museum of the Moving Image, and LaGuardia Community College. You must go to the site that you're assigned to. So as much as I love Momi, I can't go to Momi to early vote. I have to go to the Boys and Girls Club. So double check which of these sites that you need to go to. And anybody that's living basically north of, you know, Astoria Boulevard, keep in mind that's a little bit of a hike to get to your early voting site. So just factor in that extra time to get there if need be. All right, our last in-person voting option, the big mother, election day, is Tuesday, November 20th. The poll sites are open from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. So when you arrive at the poll site, you're going to go to the table with your election district listed on it. Some of you may have already received your voter ID card, so I'm just going to hide my address, and this is what it looks like, and it has my election district and assembly district on it. They also gave you, like Disney World, a fast pass, which has a barcode in the back. And you go up to the table, you put it on their scanner, and it pulls up your name in the e-poll book. You will then sign your name on the iPad, and then they will give you a paper ballot. Oops, there we go. You're gonna fill in your ballot and then bring it to the scanner, and then you're voted. Your ballot is collected. So no ballot selfies, guys. No photos. As much as it's great, it's actually against the law to take a picture of your ballot in New York State. So just, you know, make a mental memory of your ballot voting on election day. Now, here's a couple of things that I would suggest to bring with you at the polls. So obviously, bring your voter ID card and your FastPass tag. You need to wear a mask. If you're going to vote in person, masks are required at all polling sites. I would recommend bringing hand sanitizer too. They will have jugs of it there, but it's always good to have it just in case. And I would bring some water and some snacks and a fully charged cell phone or portable charger with you. We're seeing record number of turnout, especially for early voting. 128,000 Georgians voted yesterday. The lines were insane. So the biggest thing I would recommend bringing with you is patience. You know, we're gonna have hopefully a huge turnout, but you know, people feel very strongly about this election, but also there's going to be a huge crop of new poll workers. So prior to COVID, the average age of a New York State poll worker was 74, which is on the higher risk of COVID spectrum. They've done a huge push in outreach to get people to be poll workers, and they're being trained, but you know, it's their first time, especially if you're going the first day of early voting. Just keep that in mind that it may take a little bit longer, and they're doing the best they can, and they will have information to help you, and there'll be people on site to help you as well. Now, what not to bring? Nicole has some great swag in her store, but anything like, I'm not going to rock my AOC vibes pin or like my Warren t-shirt because I really want, we could have had a bad bitch America, sorry. But you want to keep that under your hoodie. We want to keep the election polls a sacred, neutral space. You can wear that all later. Also, no political literature or posters. And the reason why I highlight this is called electioneering and is hella illegal. If you do any of this at the polls. So don't get arrested when you're trying to cast your vote, and just, you know, keep everything under wraps. Go make your vote, and then you can go celebrate in social media afterwards. Also, as much as this election has been, I feel like hellscape is a gentle word. We can't bring alcohol to the polls. As much as I could fit an entire bottle of wine in my swell bottle, let's just save the margaritas and stuff for afterwards. So anyway, okay. I want to also highlight, in case you have any issues for potential issues, this is not to scare anybody, but just be prepared if any of these items happen. Let's say you go to the polls and you scan in, or you give them your name and they can't find you. Double check that you're at the right poll site. If you go to nycvotersearch.com, in fact, I'd recommend that you do it now or before you go election day. Just double check that you're registered, that it has your election district and assembly district information, and that you're good to go. Now, if you're in the right place and they're still like, sorry, Jane Smith, we can't find you, you should ask, I would like an affidavit ballot. So uttering those words triggers a legal action that they are required to let you vote by affidavit ballot. It's part of the Help America Vote Act. So even if the poll worker thinks that you're ineligible or you're at the wrong poll site, they're legally bound to give you an affidavit ballot. So you'll vote, but what will happen is Board of Elections will not count that vote until they research and confirm that your vote is actually, that you're eligible, and your vote will then be counted. So keep that in mind. Also, oops, wrong way. There we go. There could be really long lines on election day. As long as you are in line at the polls by 9 o'clock, you stay in line, you absolutely have the right to vote. Unfortunately, with previous elections, there were people online till like 1 o'clock in the morning. Hopefully that won't be the case, but they absolutely still had the right to vote as long as they were in line. It doesn't matter if you get there at 8:59 and 58 seconds. If you were in line, you are legally allowed to vote. Now, I'm going to share this information about election protection hotlines. If you do encounter any of these issues, you can call any of these numbers. Election Protection is a nonpartisan coalition that works year-round to make sure everybody has the right to vote and that their vote is counted. Also, this is a great volunteer opportunity if you're interested in helping out during early voting or election. You can sign up to be an election monitor. I actually am doing their training tomorrow night. So you can either be on site at the polls, so if people have issues, you can report them in or give them information. And they also have ways that you can volunteer from the comfort of your home. So if people call in, directing them the right information for their state, or monitor social media. So if suddenly people are like, the line for Henry David Thoreau is like around Athens Square down to Mount Sinai. Like, okay, no problem. We're going to look into it. You know, it could be a down scanner. It could be, you know, they lost power or something like that. But there are tools that you can utilize in order to be able to get the help you need on election day, but also how you can be of service as well. Hi, Mom. We have some great nonpartisan voter guides. So Tiffany highlighted some of it about how it's a little bit of a struggle to find information on candidates. Vote411.org is a great nonpartisan voter guide. It's actually created by the League of Women Voters, who is the beneficiary of all of the sales for tonight. They also have translations in English and Spanish. Ballotpedia.org, I find, is really helpful is really helpful when you're looking at judges. I don't want no Brock Turner judge that I accidentally vote for, but I found that Ballotpedia does have more information than you would find on other sites for the judicial candidates. So keep that in mind. Okay, almost there, guys. I'm going to take a little bit detour and talk about the 2020 census real quick, because this actually has a big effect on our elections. So the 2020 census is a population tally that we do every 10 years of everybody living in the United States. It determines things like how much funding our schools and hospitals get, how much funding our state and local governments get. It makes up 9% of the New York City budget. That's a big chunk of change. Also, when the census is complete, they're going to redraw our congressional maps based on how many people are living in our neighborhood. So if we're undercounted, we may have less representation. So Tiffany shared in Astoria, you're either represented by Carolyn Maloney currently or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Imagine if we had one less of those lawmakers representing our area because people didn't complete the census. And everybody should complete the census, regardless of your immigration status. If you're undocumented, green card holder, visa, baby, everybody should complete the census. All of your answers are private and confidential. It's actually a federal crime for anybody to share information outside the Census Bureau, punishable up to 5 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. Also, legally, none of the answers that you put on the census can be used against you by any government agency or court of law. So if you're undocumented, ICE is not allowed to have access to the files. If you're lying on your taxes about where you live, the IRS is not going to come after you. And it asks things like, you know, how many people are in your household? How old are they? What's their gender and age? You know, do you rent or own your home? Also, I want to highlight that kids under 5 are one of the most undercounted groups in the census. What's really shocked me because, and that's a problem, because when that kid is counted again, it's 10 years later, they're already in middle school and we may not have enough resources for them. For every person that goes undercounted in the census, we lose $4,000 a year in federal funding. So let's make sure we get all counted. You have until October 31st to respond to the census. You can go to my2020census.gov to respond. You just click on Start Questionnaire and answer questions. It will ask you for a census ID that was sent out in March, April. Some people didn't get it. That's fine. Just choose, if you do not have a census ID, click here, and you will be a huge help to your neighborhood by completing this. These are the current response rates for our area. So imagine getting 39% less of your paycheck because your neighbor didn't fill out the census. So just be like, hey, did you complete the census? Oh, you didn't? Here, you can do it right in front of me. So thank you for humoring me with that in terms of talking about the census. So to wrap up, what is your voting plan going to be? And don't just pick one option. It's a choose your own adventure. So, you know, are you going to request an absentee ballot but plan to vote on election day? Are you going to early vote, or then, you know, your backup plan is to vote on election day? My plan, I'm going to early vote, but I'm going to wait for that Tuesday, like the first Tuesday in early voting, because I figure it's going to be crazy the first 2 days. And like probably going to the polls on a Monday is like going to the post office on a Monday and is probably going to be super long. So I'm going to go on my lunch break on Tuesday and double check the hours. We have these great links. So this is all the links that I shared with you to check your voter registration, to find your early voting polling site, your sample ballot, your election day poll site, how to apply for an absentee ballot, how to track it. If you have any issues, you can always contact the Board of Elections, which is vote.nyc, and vote.nyc, and to complete the census. So, and then the election protection hotline website is 866rvote.org. So thank you very much. And I'm actually going to skip to the last slide. So whenever we talk to people at Astoria Mutual Aid about if they've registered to vote or if they complete the census, we say, hey, well, thanks for being a good neighbor, because doing all these actions is an effort of mutual aid. So thank you all, Good Neighbor Award, for listening to this, to being informed voters and being part of the process. So that's it for me. So I guess we'll kick off Q&A. I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now, if that's okay. Okay. Did it work? Did I stop sharing my screen? Okay, thank you.
It did. So we're actually, wow, I cannot believe that so many of our questions got answered. Thank you, Katie. Also so informative. I knew about 20% of everything that you said today. So thank you so much for that. As Nicole said in the chat box, this is a great time to go ahead and start dropping your questions. But I think a lot of them may or may not have been answered, but I guess I'm going to turn it back over to Tiffany. If there was anything that has come up in the chat that you want to take a stab at, I think
I didn't see any. Oh, actually, when I got knocked off, I lost the chat. So I don't know if anything came in while I was speaking, but I do see. Well, I think actually, Katie, I think you answered that.
Yeah.
Oh, no, you didn't. You did, right?
There was a question, I think, about what's the difference between voting Democratic or the Working Families Party, but I think
Oh, there was.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Here,
Yeah, I can absolutely answer that. And then there also was a question about moving in and out and registration.
Yeah, I can address that one real quick. So
Okay,
if
yeah.
someone has moved recently, I would go to nycvotersearch.com and just see where you're currently registered. If you're still registered at your old address, I would either request an absentee ballot or go, drag your butt back to your old polling place. Right now, we're past the voter registration deadline to make any changes. So you're either going to have to vote where you are or, via absentee or go back to your old neighborhood. Okay.
Okay, so the difference between voting on the Democratic or the WFP line, the thing that I want to just keep stressing is that whether you vote on the Democratic line or the Working Families line, it is a vote for Joe Biden and gets counted and accumulated as such. It is especially significant in New York because it speaks to a specific set of politics or policies that folks are pushing for. We hear people talk a lot about not all Democrats are alike. And so folks that are choosing to vote on the Working Families line, essentially the party stands for just building a multiracial working class movement that puts forth a set of policies that really center Black and Brown and working class and lower income community members with their policy priorities. So, it shows establishment electeds within the state and all the way to the White House, essentially, that even though we are a blue stronghold state, that we demand more than what's considered sort of the status quo, and that we have electoral muscle to do something about it, especially when 2022 rolls around and we're looking at the midterms and the gubernatorial race. So I think that's, the biggest difference. It's, again, a way to really to tell folks in power specifically more information about what your politics and your priorities are, so that they then incorporate those things into how they advocate or legislate.
I do want to add one more note about that. So you don't have to be registered with a political party to vote for that candidate on the ballot.
Right.
So it's, again, choose your own adventure. General election, you could vote for whatever party. You don't specifically have to vote that and on that party line. Your party registration only has something to do with the primary. And New York State is a closed primary state, which means you must be registered with that political party to vote in that primary. But then there's an additional threshold for that political party to hit in order to have a statewide primary. As of today, the Democrat and Republican parties are the only parties that meet that threshold in New York State. So that may change in 2021, but that's what we're working with right now. But just because you're registered with that political party doesn't mean you have to go ding, 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 ding. You can, that's the beauty about our elections. It's private ballot and you get to figure out who you're going to vote for. I did see a thing in this about the census. So a little background on the census. The census was officially supposed to end before COVID at the end of July. Obviously, COVID derailed things, and census takers, or enumerators as they called, weren't starting to go door to door until the end of July. So that delayed things. Initially, that extended deadline was going to be October 31st. But I'm trying to figure out the most nonpartisan way to say this. Wilbur Ross, who's the U.S. Commerce Secretary, who was famous for wanting to put a citizenship question on the census until the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that, wanted to end the census early. So he said, no, we're going to end it September 31st. And a federal judge was like, no. And then he said, did I stutter? And she said, do you really want to, defy a federal judge? So right now, the deadline, according to the federal judge, is October 31st. Wilbur Ross did try and end it on October 5th. So obviously with this back and forth tennis match in terms of the deadline, it's just so important that we get as many people to complete it as quickly as possible, just in case that deadline moves again. But either way, the very last part is going to be October 31st. So
I got a notification at 5:50 that the Supreme Court has decided to end it early. So that's new info.
Thank you for the breaking news. I feel like so much of my reactions to things are like described in two GIFs. One is Madeline Kahn in Clue going, flames, flames at the side of my face. And the other one is Hulk smash, where Hulk is just like beating the crap out of Loki. And that's my reaction to that thing. So if you can, nudge as many people as you know to finish the census tonight, so we can get the funding that we need. Tiffany, I think there's a question for you in the chat. Are some court positions nonpartisan? Why do they have political affiliations?
So it's I mean, there's the larger, like, broader question of whether our judges, our legal system is, like, in theory, it's supposed to be nonpartisan, but absolutely at every single, you know, level of the court system, it's partisan, right? Like our laws are put into place, you know, enacted, enforced in ways that are like.
Hello. How are you?
Hi, Renee. We can hear you.
But you know, because we are such a Democratic stronghold here in New York City, almost every judge typically runs as a Democrat, and so you'll even see the most conservative of judges run as Democrats here because it's really the only viable way to run here, and so that's something to be really mindful of. I don't know. On the most basic level, I reject the idea that our judges are nonpartisan. I mean, as somebody who has practiced law, it just like simply is not true. And we see it in like the starkest way that we see it is in our Supreme Court, right? We consistently talk about, well, it's not supposed to be nonpartisan, but we're constantly talking about the makeup of our Supreme, you know, our Supreme Court.
Any other questions? Everybody got their voting plan?
Oh, Brianna has a question about why certain judges are appointed, but others have to run, like the ones on the ballot this year. You know, I don't know sort of the reason why or like the history of it, but it is true. Like the mayor appoints a certain number of judges, and then, you know, a certain set of judges have to run for election. But it's really interesting because the judges that end up running, I mean, there are like any position, right? There are lots of barriers to access. You have to have, you know, a lot of money behind you to run. You have to have certain kinds of relationships to run successfully, especially when it comes to judicial seats, like more so than in other elected seats. Like I have a friend who is now a judicial delegate and does a lot of that work. And she had given me information that blew my mind. I mean, the fact that you have judges running for election, but there was sort of this body behind the scene that was like, well, it's not your turn. It's not your turn. It's not your turn. And then you had at the last minute folks kind of like backing out and removing themselves from being like a candidate for consideration because sort of they were like told to.
We have another question. There's two in the chat box. There's one about we're not voting for city council until next year, but how does that position interact with the state Senate and Assembly?
We honestly, to be really effective, we need alignment at all levels of government, right? So like, you know, you could have your state legislators fighting for a specific issue, but like in order to, let's take housing, for example. We saw all these rent protections, right? We want to make sure that every human being is housed, they have a safe place to lay their head down at night, can live with a level of dignity. There's only so much that like the Senate has the power to do. For example, at the city level, not only are there other budgetary interventions that can be made on the city level when we talk about you know, where our money goes, but also, for example, on the city level, you have the ability to legalize basement apartments. where like that's not something that's legislated on the state level. So there are all of these areas where really they could be working together to sort of fill every gap that might exist on a particular issue, right? If we want to save our planet because, you know, climate change is real, science is real, we're going to need every level of government to get on board, because what good is, you know, what good is it if only one level of government says, well, we'll cut down our carbon emissions by this year, if like another level of government is like, no, we're not messing with it. We're not doing any of those things. So I just think a lot of it too is like alignment on what our priorities are in terms of the kinds of communities and the kind of public health and public safety infrastructures we want to see. You really need all pieces of government working together and like all pulling their levers that they have access to.
I can answer the question. So there's a question in the chat that says, I have to look for my voter ID card, but can I still vote in person without it? Yes, it should have gone out in the mail this week, but give it another day if you haven't. Go to nycvotersearch.com and just make sure that you registered. I did include this in my presentation because it's more of a registration thing, but if let's say it's been a while since someone voted, most likely more than 5 years, there's a good chance that you've been moved to the inactive voter rolls. So what that means is you haven't participated in the last 2 federal elections or the last 2 presidential elections. So therefore, when you go to the polls, your name won't be in the book. In that case, request an affidavit ballot and you can definitely vote. You know, the requirements to vote in New York State: you must be 18 years or older on or before election day. You must be a US citizen. You must not be claiming the right to vote anywhere else. You must have lived in the state 30 days prior to the election. And you must not have been convicted of a felony, or if you have been convicted of a felony, you must have completed your prison sentence and your probation period, and then you absolutely can re-register to vote. So technically, as long as you meet those requirements, and if you show up on election day and you're not in the book, just say, I want an affidavit ballot. And that, I'm waiting for confirmation, but I did take a look at the poll worker training manual. That would serve as like an updated registration form. But if you can head that off at the pass, just go to nycvotersearch.com. So poll workers are not allowed to ask you for identification unless you're completing your registration. So when someone registers, most of the time they're putting their last 4 of their social or their driver's license ID number. But if you don't have those things, you can provide a bank statement with your name and address on it, a pay stub, you know, a Con Ed bill, a Verizon bill. Essentially, it doesn't require photo ID, but that's the only time that a poll worker can ask you for ID. It'll say in the book, check ID. Otherwise, you know, if you're like, hey, I'm not on the voter rolls, I'd like to request an affidavit ballot, hopefully once they do the research, your ballot will be counted.
Does anyone have any other questions? We are way ahead of time, which is fine. I'm going to talk a little bit, but if anyone still thinks of anything, go ahead and put it in the chat box. But Renee had to sign off, so I'm saying first, thank you to everyone. Thank you to Tiffany and to Katie. This was really, really awesome. This is information that, you know, we should know, we should just know. And unfortunately, it's hard to get this information sometimes. So thank you so much for taking the time. And then thank you to LFA, Katie and Laura for helping for helping put this event together. We actually pulled it together pretty quickly. So thank you for that. Laura has been doing all the really cool slides. You may, if you follow us on Instagram, you may have seen. And we are going to be doing a follow-up Instagram story post with a lot of the information we had today. So so be on the lookout for that. Please share it. Let's get this information out to more people. That's like the whole point, right? Also want to let you guys know, thank you for your donation. The money you paid for the entry was 100% donation. We're not taking a single cent. So we raised over $300 for the League of Women Voters. And actually, Katie, I don't know if you want to, like, you said you volunteer with them, if you just want to like give a little bit about what they do.
They are a fantastic fabulous voter education and advocacy organization. They are nonpartisan. I've been trained by them a few times on how to register people to vote, and volunteered with them at the Women's March and the March for Our Lives, registering people to vote. They also do great census outreach as well. They put out amazing advocacy toolkits on, although they're nonpartisan, they do take stances on certain things. So after the George Floyd protests were going on, they put out great toolkits, specifically the City of New York chapter, on repealing 50A and a New York City budget justice in terms of defunding the police. They also, anytime you hear about a state getting sued because their districts are gerrymandered to hell, it's usually League of Women Voters that is the one suing that state and winning. So bravo to them. Check out their website. They put out great voter education guide. They'll train you on how to register voters. I'm a huge fan of theirs, and so happy that the money is going to them too.
So thank you everyone for that. You also get a sticker with your admission. So I'm going to send an email after, if you would like it mailed or to pick up at the Brass Owl. It's actually on my phone. You can actually see it. It's like super cute. So you will be getting one of those. And actually we have a question. Yay. So it looks like a Katie question.
Yes, I'm pulling up the accessibility thing. So if you need assistance at the polls, you may be assisted by any person of your choice, including a trained poll worker. Everybody except your employer or union representative is not allowed to assist you at the polls for obvious reasons. And that's if you can't read, if you cannot see the names printed, or you do not speak English. There's also an accessibility device that they can use that you can mark your ballot, whether it's a touchscreen. They also have a Braille keypad, a sip and puff device, and a rocker paddle. So when you arrive at the polls, you can request that. So they're saying, I'll put it actually in the chat so you can see the full details. Nicole, to everybody. So they have audio cues, they have Braille, they also have different languages. They usually will have translators. It's usually Spanish, Chinese, Korean, and Bengali. And they'll also have, it says, audio on their ballot media devices in Spanish, Chinese, Mandarin Chinese, Cantonese, Korean, and Bengali. But like it said, you can totally bring a friend from you if you need assistance. Just make sure they're not your union rep or boss telling you who to vote for. I hope that answers Abby's question. You can still apply for an absentee ballot now. The sooner the better. If you're concerned about getting it back in time, like I said, either you can drop it at the polls or have a trusted friend or source drop it off at the polls for you. That way it'll save you the mailing time. But Board of Elections, they were saying on their Twitter account today, just apply as quickly as possible. And again, the website is nycabsentee.com. I'm going to put that in the chat. But the deadline to apply for an absentee ballot is October 27th, so technically you got 2 more weeks.
Great, I love these questions rolling in. Anyone else before I wrap up? All right, well, thank you so much. Thank you for everyone for joining us. Thank you for the panel. This was a lot of fun. We're hoping Ladies First can do some more things like this in the future. We really enjoyed putting this together. So thank you again. And everyone, happy voting. Hopefully.